In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Dear family, today let us ponder today's Doctor of the Church, St. Alphonsus Liguori, and the newest about-to-be Doctor of the Church, St. John Henry Newman. Let us start with Cardinal St. John Henry Newman. In all the years I've ever heard of this great convert saint, the thing that stood out most was his glorious admonition, read the church fathers and cease to be Protestant. You read about his conversion. He really struggled, but he came to the truth, the one and only truth, one and only Catholic Apostolic Church. As you all know, for a couple months now, I've been steeped in the church fathers he was talking about, and a boatload of saints and martyrs. So I am eminently qualified to give him a ringing endorsement to this saint's admonition, read the church fathers. Should do it. And when I get that book published, she could do it with ease. But to be honest, I did not know much about him outside of this. There's another little quote I'll be mentioning later. So I had to do some research on St. John Henry Newman, Cardinal St. John Henry Newman. He's born in February 21st, 1801, and he died August 11th, 1890. So that was 135 years ago. He was an English Catholic theologian, academic, philosopher, historian, writer, and poet. He was previously an Anglican priest, and after his conversion, he was ordained to the Catholic priest. Because guess what? The Anglican one doesn't count. So there has to be something take place. And after his conversion, he became a cardinal. He was an important and controversial figure in the religious history of England in the 19th century and was known nationally by the mid-1830s. Originally an evangelical academic at the University of Oxford and priest in the Church of England, he was drawn to the high church tradition of Anglicanism. We can't be surprised by that here. The church, when holy sacrifices of the Mass were properly celebrated, when our devotion and our worship life are what they're supposed to be, people are drawn to it. He became one of the more notable leaders of the Oxford movement, an influential and controversial group of Anglicans who wished to restore to the Church of England many Catholic beliefs in liturgical rituals from before the English Reformation. So that's what it said in what I was reading, before the English Reformation. But remember, dear family, it is not, and it never will be a Reformation. There's no such thing as a Protestant Reformation. Reformation, to reform, implies a good thing. From now on, you always should refer to the establishment of all those Protestant denominations, and especially the non-denominationals out there. I told you when I was first studying about how many non-denominationals, there was over 80,000, growing at 1,000 per year in the United States alone. You should refer to that as Protestant deformation. For every single one of them, get it straight. Don't play fast and loose with this. Get it straight. Every single one of them has deformed the true church. To a greater or lesser extent, it is a deformation into something utterly damnable to eternal souls. Now, you don't have to take my word for it. Sounds harsh, doesn't it? Well, the risk of sounding like a broken record, on Sunday, July 20th, I gave you a partial historical record. This started with Jesus in the Gospel of John, chapter 6 and 8, amongst the entirety of his messianic teaching. And then, as you know, we heard dogmatic definitions of 3 councils and popes. Then we heard 5 more papal teachings over 2 millennia, including Pope St. Gregory the Great, Doctor of the Church. And I just learned this today. You can always learn something new. He was one of the first 4 named as a Doctor of the Church, Pope St. Gregory the Great. We heard from him on Sunday, the 20th. And then we heard from 10 more saints, including 2 martyrs and 4 more doctors of the Church, including St. Robert Bellman and St. Alphonsus Liguori, the saint we're celebrating today. All speaking the undeniable truth, the deposit of faith, the unchanged and unchangeable dogma of the Church, not the deformed dogma, but the unchanged and unchangeable deposit of faith, all saying the same thing. Instead of reiterating 18 examples, which I think I reiterated some on Wednesday, today let us recollect just 2, because I looked into them a little more close. First, let us hear from Pope Eugene IV speaking ex cathedra at the Council of Florence in his document Cantate Domino, 1441 AD, as just one perfect example. The most holy Roman Church firmly believes, professes, and preaches. When you hear that, not just this is what, no, it's believes, professes, and preaches. Those are words of dogma that he's speaking. That none of those existing outside the Catholic Church, not only pagans, also Jews, heretics, and schismatics, can ever be partakers of eternal life, and that they are to go into the eternal fire which was prepared for the devil and his angels. That sounds pretty harsh. That's anti-Semitic. Well, go read John chapter 8, like I told you to, if you haven't already. Jesus. Just quoting Jesus. Pope Eugene IV continues, unless before death they are joined with her, the Catholic Church. No one, let his almsgiving be as great as it may. So it doesn't matter how much money you give. This is 1 Corinthians 13. This 1 Corinthians 1:13, or 1 Corinthians chapter 13. No one, let his almsgiving be as great as it may, no one, even if he pour out his blood for the name of Christ, can be saved, unless they abide within the bosom and unity of the Catholic Church. I think that's pretty clear. There's no wiggle room there. There's no shades of gray going on here. Amen, amen, I say to you, go read Cantate Domino. It's an ex cathedra, in other words, from the chair of Peter himself, dogmatic statement. I just read it in all its fullness this afternoon. I have been working on this on time, today's meditation. Just read it in all its fullness. And it's not very long, but I was stunned by what he wrote as a dogmatic statement, as an ex cathedra from the chair of Peter statement. I just read it to you, but I read you a little bit. If every person known as a pope splainer, remember how there were so many pope splainers with regard to Jorge Bergoglio? They kept having to explain away every time he did something that was magnificently heretical, apostate, explained away the Pachamama, explained away, well, the Ten Commandments are not rigid. Okay, go on. I don't have to, not with you. But if every pope splainer bothered to read Cantate Domino, they would do that. They would realize what completely uninformed ignorances they are when it comes to their defense of the anti-pope Jorge Bergoglio. It's right there. Cantate Domino. Short, sweet, black and white, case closed, period. Well, as for our second example, let us hear again from Cardinal St. Robert Bellarmine, also doctor of the Church, as another perfect example. Outside the Church, there is no salvation. That's pretty clear. I could just stop right there and we could just go home. But no, because we're waiting. We're not going home yet. Outside the Church, there is no salvation. How dare anybody? Somebody got excommunicated for saying that in the 60s, 70s. A priest, a teacher at Catholic University, said there's no salvation outside the Church. He's just quoting a doctrine of the Church. He's quoting, 2,000 years of unchanged and unchangeable doctrine. They excommunicated it. Now everybody's afraid to say it. And now what you get is Bob Barron saying, well, Jesus is just a privileged way. If anybody should be excommunicated, it's Bob Barron. Anyway, Cardinal St. Robert Bellarmine, doctor of the Church, said, outside the Church, there's no salvation. Therefore, in the symbol, Apostles' Creed, we join together with the Church with the remission of sins. I believe in the Holy Catholic Church, the communion of saints, and forgiveness of sins. For this reason, the Church is compared to the Ark of Noah. Remember, I read that for the first time, how amazing that is. Because just as during the deluge, everyone perished who was not in the Ark, so now those perish who are not in the Church. Period. That's pretty clear. These are two perfect examples of undeniable, unchangeable truth. Let us add to them a couple new comments. from new people that I haven't talked about, which only further cements this unchangeable truth. Let us hear from Leo the 13th. He is a great one. He wrote so much. How is it that he hasn't been elevated to being a doctor of the church? I'm confused by it. I thought, if anybody, right there, Leo the 13th. Anyway, he said the worst kind of heretic is the one who, while teaching mostly Catholic doctrine, add a word of heresy like a drop of poison in a cup of water. So just so you know, dear family, this is not where I got the life lesson of rat poison. And that came from a sermon I heard providentially in Lower Michigan. But look at that. The great Pope Leo the 13th, who had his vision on October the 13th, 1884, 33 years to the day before the miracle of the sun at Fatima, gave us the prayer of St. Michael. He understood back then the rat poison in the church, which appears like Satan in the Cardinal. Oh, surely you surely will not die. Isn't that the ultimate what we're being offered today? Go ahead and do what you please. You surely will not die. There's nothing new. This is Satan in the garden. When you hear those words come out of a priest, bishop, cardinal, or Jorge Bergoglio, that's the first thought you should come to your mind. Hey, I've heard that before somewhere. Oh yeah, that's right. Genesis chapter 3. Rat poison. Pope Leo the 13th also said the equal tolerance of all religions is the same as atheism. Well, isn't that something? Take that, Jorge Bergoglio and Bob Barron and every other heretic in the hierarchy. Oh, Father, people say, the times have changed. The church is developing its doctrine. If you hear that rat poison, when we do, I've heard it too, here's what you say. So then, you think your scholarship is so grand as to exceed the cumulative knowledge of 2,000 years of saints and martyrs, like Pope St. Pius X, for instance, who said, quote, progress of dogma is in reality nothing but corruption of dogmas. I absolutely reject the heretical doctrine of the evolution of dogma as passing from one meaning to the other, and different from the sense in which the church originally held it. There's no development possible. Which is key, of course, because as Pope St. Pius X also said, the Catholic Church alone, being the bride of Christ and having all things in common with her divine spouse, is the depository of truth. Truth doesn't change. It never changes. It cannot change. And Pope St. Pius X also said in his encyclical Acerbo Nimis in 1905, quote, this we solemnly affirm. The majority of those who are condemned to eternal punishment fall into this everlasting misfortune through ignorance of the mysteries of the faith, which must necessarily be known and believed by all who belong to the elect. So this is inside. I was just having this deep, long theological discussion this past week with a convert who still was uneasy about the possibility that someone who has not heard the gospel, isn't belong to the Catholic Church, cannot be saved. Like God's going to give. Why would God, here's what you're going to get asked. Well, why would God create a human being only to know that they're going to be duped? Oh, it's a tough question, isn't it? But first, the starting point is here with St. Pius X stating the unchanged and changeable truth, and then try and work from that instead of saying, well, these people don't know, therefore they can't. So I have a better idea of God's mercy and God's justice and what's God going to do with all these people than he does, than what Jesus taught. Because didn't Jesus teach, unless you eat my body and drink my blood, you do not have life within you? Didn't Jesus teach in John chapter 3, unless you are born again in water and the Spirit, you shall not enter the kingdom of heaven? Quote, that's a quote from Jesus. So if you think you have a better idea than Jesus, good luck with that one. So ignorance of the mysteries of the faith is a problem. why it's a huge problem, the culpable ignorance of the many, is because, as Pope St. Pius X also said in his encyclical E Supremi in 1903, oh, actually, this is a serious part of the answer to that question. But what about those who may be heaven? Now, the way to reach Christ is not hard to find. It is the Catholic Church. Rightly does St. John Chrysostom, another doctor of the Church, inculcate, the Church is thy hope, the Church is thy salvation, the Church is thy refuge. It was for this that Christ founded it, gaining it at the price of his blood. Ponder that. This church, the Catholic Church, the one and only Catholic Church, was bought at the price of his blood. Not the 90,000 or whatever non-denominationals, not all those Protestants, not the Muslims, not the Jews, not the Hindus, not the Buddhists. The Catholic Church was bought at the price of his blood. And made it, he continues, says Pope St. Pius X, and made it the depository of his doctrine and his laws, bestowing upon it, the Catholic Church, at the same time an inexhaustible treasury of graces for the sanctification and salvation of men. So if you're not getting that grace of the sanctification by and through the Catholic Church, what makes you think you have the white wedding garment that gets you into the wedding feast of heaven? You just connect a few dots and you see, I might not understand the idea, I might not understand the concept, but I may never understand the concept, but you can't argue with Jesus. In John chapter 3, the whole Gospels, can't argue with them. He said what he said. We either believe it or we don't. If you believe it, well, fine, you're Catholic. If you don't believe it, get out. Quit pretending. I mean, who's fooling who? Anyway, this truth about the Church should be proclaimed by every priest, bishop, cardinal, or pope, for as Pope St. Pius X also said, how I tremble to think that souls can be punished for all eternity on account of the negligence of their pastor. So you see, you don't get a free get-out-of-jail card just because I'm a loser. If I'm not doing a good job up here, that doesn't excuse you. You still have an affirmative obligation to come to know your faith. We can't blame the lousy pastors, bishops, cardinals, or pope. We can't blame them. How I tremble to think that souls can be punished for all eternity on account of the negligence of their pastor, that innocent people can be led from the path of truth because the words of inspired text were never preached to them. It's hard to do that 7 minutes. And that the spirit of the world, and of our time especially, so this is Pius X. So when did he write this? Every time in 1903, somewhere in that. Spirit of the times back then was pretty bad. Bad enough for him to say what he said. It has not gotten better. The spirit of the world. Why do we think that all the people out there, they haven't heard, the gospel wasn't proclaimed to them properly? There's natural law written in our hearts that is contrary to the spirit of the world. Do you get that? The natural law written into our hearts is contrary to the spirit of the world. So if you're living in the spirit of the world, that's contrary to the natural law. And you have to follow the natural law to getting death. Anyway, he goes on. The world is pour into him. So the spirit of the world, and of our time especially, should pour into ill-instructed minds for want of a firm hand to check its tide. I had a sacred duty to defend the truth openly, for God will ask me to render an account for all those souls who have strayed into the ways of perdition. Isn't it the ways of the world? The ways of perdition? Isn't that the ways of the world? So realize, dear family, how damning it was for Bishop Callahan to say to my face that 80% of Catholics don't know right from wrong because we bishops have failed to teach them the faith for over 50 years. And just as damning is when Cardinal Newman said essentially the same thing on CBS on national TV. Callahan, Dolan, and the rest of them have utterly have failed to take the advice of Pope St. Pius X, who said, quote, let priests take care not to accept from the liberal any ideas which under the mask of good pretend to reconcile justice with iniquity. So what are we doing today? Reconciling justice with iniquity. What's a perfect example? Irregular relationships, that James Martin likes to talk about. That's one great example. Reconciling the butchering of babies with women's health care. That's reconciling justice with iniquity. He said, liberal Catholics are wolves in sheep's clothing. And that's pretty obvious when you see them. Just listen to them and then try to tell them the truth and watch them fly off the handle, because that's what they do. Why? Because they don't have the Holy Spirit within them. They have quite another spirit within them. He said the priest must unveil to the people their perfidious plot, their iniquitous design, that of the liberal Catholics he's talking about. He said, have courage, you must never yield, nor is there any need to yield. You must go into the attack wholeheartedly. Not in secret, but in public. Not behind barred doors, but in the open, in the view of all. Go on the attack, he's telling good Catholics. So here's a memo to Callahan and to Dolan and all the rest. The great Cardinal Seurat said, quote, the church is dying because her pastors are afraid to speak in all truth and clarity. We in the Council Priests, the Coalition of Council Priests, say we're not the council ones. I'm speaking pretty freely. The council ones are the ones that are so timid and afraid in the pulpits. They're afraid to say anything because of fear their bishop is going to cancel them. They're the ones who are canceled, not me. Oh, no. Well, not surprising it is then that Cardinal St. John Henry Newman said over 100 years ago that the great tragedy in the Catholic Church is the ignorance of the laity. It's been more than 50 years. How's the laity so ignorant? Well, they're not doing their job. They're not doing their own homework. They're not following their own natural law written into their hearts, the natural law of love, and God is love. But the priests, bishops, cardinals, well, not the Pope. Pope was doing a great job. Well, in contrast to 2,000 years of Jesus, the apostles and fathers of the church, the popes, the doctors of the church, and really countless martyrs and Catholic greats such as Pope St. Pius X, Cardinal St. John Henry Newman, and from a current great Cardinal Seurat, were confronted by the apostate Jorge Bergoglio, who said, God will the plurality of religions that they all roads lead to hell or to heaven. And let us never forget Barron's heresy, that Jesus is just a privilege away. And dare we hope hell is an empty place. It's the only place down there. Who said that? Von Balthasar. He was a heretic, dude. The family, all religions are not the same period. I don't know how much more convincing I could be than quoting all the people that I just quoted today who said that very thing. And every priest, bishop, cardinal, or pope who teaches otherwise, anathema sit. Let them be accursed. Let's not be afraid to say it. Let them be damned through their fault, through their own grievous fault. Why is all this important? Because Leo XIV has decided to make Cardinal Newman a doctor of the church. Really? Not Leo XIII? Not Pius X? If you made those guys doctors of the church, that would give even greater weights to all the things they said that I just quoted you. Well, let's pick Cardinal Newman. So tell me, dear family, if you would tell me one thing, important or even not important, written by Cardinal Newman. Anybody? Tell me one thing. And here's what I found in doing my research. His major writings, this is what it says, his major writings include tracts for the times, his autobiography, Apologia Pro Vita Sua, the Grammar of Assent, whatever that is, and the poem, The Dream of Gerontius, which was set to music in 1900. There it is. Anybody have you heard of those before? Or read any of it? Don't even bother. Go read Cantate Domino. That's your homework. I did look into the tracts, but really until today had never heard of them. Not seminary, not post-seminary, never have I heard of them. How important then can they be? We've all heard of Augustine's Confessions, haven't we? Aquinas's, gosh, my mind's notes just got blank. What's it called? What's Aquinas's? Summa. There we go. We've all heard of those, right? Never heard of the tracts for our times. How important can they be to suddenly, out of the blue, these handful of tracts rise to the level of doctor of the church? over such luminaries as Leo XIII and Pius X. Well, I'm about to give you what Paul Harvey said to the rest of the story. Oh, gosh, sometimes it takes the winds out of our sails, but just remember, the worse it looks, the worse it gets. Glory be to God, he's coming. On September 17, 2010, NPR, you know how left-wing they are, NPR came out, kind of an ironic way to put it, came out with an article putting out there the question, was Cardinal Newman gay? Insinuation and innuendo were everywhere in the article, written by Barbara Bradley Haggerty. At the time, I was suspicious about any woman who keeps such a long name, who has to have that middle name that isn't even like a saint name, just kind of another last name. How about you just go by your husband's name, or maybe you were a feminist that didn't get married, and now you're just a bitter feminist. Anyway, I'm always suspicious. Who then puts into the public forum, as she did, such salacious insinuations as this. And it makes me wonder, what's her agenda? I mean, that's what I've started thinking when I saw this title. Well, it didn't take me long to find out. In her article, she first points out, well, many saints had a past. Okay, she's eroding the foundation of the saints. So it wouldn't be surprising, therefore, as the insinuation, is the inference, well, Cardinal Newman had a past. So, because you could still be a saint and have a past, it's okay, whatever Cardinal Newman was up to. Then she subtitles a part of her article as provocative letters. Why do you have to say provocative? Why not just say personal letters written by Cardinal Newman to all his associates, in particular to his best friend? She states that in these letters, some believe. It's always the anonymous some, right? They, the experts say. Well, who the heck are the some, the they, or the experts? But she puts it out there because when you put it out there in print, it almost seems like it's true. He's not here to defend himself. Some experts say, she states that Newman may have come close to the line, if not in homosexual actions, then in orientation. And then, to seal the deal, Barbara Bradley Haggerty quotes none other than Bergoglio best boy James Martin, who dared to say, it's not unreasonable to think Cardinal Newman might have been a homosexual. His letters and his comments on the death of one of his close friends are quite provocative. Remember, this is back in 2010, and Martin only has gotten exponentially worse since then, what with his support from none other than his bud Bergoglio. And then to seal the deal of her insinuations, of her inferences, of her proposition, which I had never heard until yesterday. Have you ever heard any kind of insinuation about Cardinal St. John Henry Newman? No, never. But to seal the deal, Barbara Bradley Haggerty quotes another author, John Cornwell. Never hear of that expert? John Cornwell? He wrote a biography on John Henry Cardinal Newman. He said, even doing things like, now he's talking about Newman and his best priest friend. Even doing such things like packing his bags before he went, making sure he was taking his medicine. And I do that every day with my mom and dad. If you love somebody, doesn't that mean you maybe make sure they're okay? My dad's forgetful. If he's going somewhere, I'm going to make sure he's packed what he's supposed to pack. I make sure he takes his medicine. Making sure he kept his dental appointments. I can't tell you the number of dental appointments I've taken my parents to.